Assassin's Creed Origins feels like a turning point for the franchise. After playing through all the previous AC games for this series retrospective that I've been doing for a while now, there are certain games that stick out for me as being noteworthy for the ways they push the series forward or just mix up the formula. Assassin's Creed 2 was an improvement and refinement on the original game in almost every way, and really laid the groundwork for what the series' identity would be for the next few iterations. Then Black Flag was the next game to really shake up the formula, although much of what exists in Black Flag came from AC3 first. Still, Black Flag was a major departure for the series, and since I finished playing it, I've been waiting for the next title that would be the next game changer. Origins is that game. I played Assassin's Creed Origins on the Xbox Series X for one playthrough on normal difficulty. This video will contain spoilers throughout. You have been warned. Origins' depiction of ancient Egypt is breathtaking. The landscapes are vast with golden shimmering sand dunes that stretch across the ancient African deserts. The pyramids tower, the cities bustle both Egyptian and Greek, and the lush verdant plant life of the oasis contrasts starkly against the barren desert. As I explored Egypt, I would regularly stop and stare in awe at the beautiful world that Ubisoft had created. Like I was seriously getting some Ghost of Tsushima or Red Dead 2 vibes in terms of just how gorgeous the world really is. And the draw distance is astonishing. Standing on top of a viewpoint and seeing just how far into the distance you can see leaves a big impression. I don't know if ancient Egypt is my favorite setting in the AC series, but it's definitely the most impressive so far. Each city you explore is littered with small details like the various fruit and meat for sale at the market or the NPCs roaming the street in whatever state of dress they may be in. Yeah, there is a lot of copy and paste here just like previous games, but the amount of unique structures, assets, and textures is still remarkable. It seems that Origins originally launched in a bit of a buggy state, not Unity levels of broken, but still buggy. That was 4 years ago, and I can say that I only encountered a handful of glitches in my playthrough, like a few instances of things floating in the air or dialogue lines playing on top of each other or repeating, but that's it. And over the 40 hours of my playthrough, these glitches were very, very rare. The game also had a rock-solid frame rate of 30 frames per second. Unfortunately, Ubisoft hasn't released a Series X performance upgrade for the game as of the writing of the script, and I don't know if they intend to do so at some point. Origins has a dialogue boost option, which is interesting to note as some previous games in the series had some issues with dialogue being too quiet. So I guess Ubisoft were aware of that. Origins also brings back multiple save slots, which the series hasn't had since Unity removed them. The sound design is great. The sounds of Egypt are just as important as the sights for immersing the player. The wind blowing the desert sand around, the hippos roaring and splashing in the water, the voices of the population in the cities, all of this is realized wonderfully. The game's score is similarly excellent. The music has a bunch of memorable motifs, but overall has an air of mystery and a sense of discovery, which is mainly achieved using synths, which surprised me at first. I mean, when you think of ancient Egypt, electronic synthesizers are not what pops into my mind at least, but it actually works very well. There are some real instruments of course like lutes and drums, and they fit into the soundscape nicely. Origins takes place in ancient Egypt, the earliest time period we've seen in the series so far. You play as Bayek, a Magi, which is basically a protector of a region in Egypt. In Bayek's case, it's his home of Siwa. A group known as the Order of Ancients takes Bayek and his son Khemu prisoner and try to force him to use a piece of Eden to open a precursor vault buried beneath Siwa. Unfortunately, Bayek doesn't know anything about it, and in the ensuing struggle, Khemu is killed. Bayek then goes on a quest for revenge that leads him across Egypt, while also aiding Cleopatra in reclaiming her throne, as the Order of Ancients are her enemies as well. Oh, and I guess the Assassin Brotherhood is created in this game. Sort of. Honestly, I didn't really care for origin story all that much, which, by the way, after playing through all the Assassin's Creed games for this retrospective series, I've come to realize that there's only a few games in the franchise that I think have legitimately good stories, while the rest have stories that range from just alright to not that great. Origins kind of falls into the camp of just alright. But before I get into all that, I do want to say that I really did like Bayek as the protagonist. He has charisma and cares about the people of Egypt, which makes him easy to like, and his desire to avenge his son is easy to sympathize with. Revenge stories are definitely the AC series' bread and butter, and while I do wish that the series would try something else more often, it does as good of a job as anything else in terms of setting up a list of targets for you to kill over the course of the game. Unfortunately, like most of the games in the series, almost none of the Order get fleshed out very much, so I never really cared about killing them beyond just wanting them to pay for Khemu's death. The Order of Ancients are just another group of villains for our sort of assassin to kill. There are some pretty cool cutscenes that look fantastic for each final kill conversation, but even though the dialogue is well written, it doesn't really feel like much is actually being said in these conversations. Bayek's wife Aya is also playable at certain points in the story, and her parts are where you get to engage with Origin's version of the series ship combat. Personally, I didn't really care that much about Aya. Unlike Bayek, we never actually get to see Aya have any scenes with Khemu, so her feelings on the Order and her motivations feel more distant to the player, which might be by design actually, as over the course of the game it becomes clear that Aya and Bayek have chosen to deal with Khemu's death in different ways, even if they both want the Order to be destroyed and they ultimately separate at the end of the game. It also doesn't help that Aya decides to become heavily involved with helping Cleopatra reclaim her throne, but the second I saw Cleopatra for the first time I thought, oh, well, she's definitely gonna betray us, and yeah, she did. I wouldn't be surprised to learn that Aya might have been intended to have more of a role in the story as a playable character, similar to how Evie and Jacob worked in Syndicate. Maybe not to that extent, but at least have a few more missions playing as her. Ultimately, most of the game's story kind of feels like same old for the series. You show up to a new part of the world, you do a few story missions, meet some new characters, then kill the target, rinse and repeat. And while there's nothing necessarily wrong with that formula, there's also nothing really special about it anymore, at least not to me. Not after so many games in the franchise have had the same formula. Also, I think the game ends a little weirdly. At some point, Aya and Bayek finally split and we finish the game as Aya. She even gets the ending monologue even though we've played as Bayek for 95% of the game and he's still alive. Aya also doesn't have the same skills or weapons as Bayek, so playing as her to end the story was a little awkward because you don't know exactly what abilities she has. Overall, I wasn't too keen about the premise of the game in general. You know, the whole origins part of the story. We get to see the first leap of faith, see Bayek lose his finger using the hidden blade, see how the hidden ones are formed, which aren't even technically assassins yet, I think. These kinds of entries into long-running franchises where the creators promise to show the inception of everything usually feel kind of pointless to me, especially since it doesn't really change anything in the series. And personally, when I think about the origins of the assassins, I won't be thinking about Egypt. I'm still going to be thinking about Masyaf. Plus, Odyssey takes place chronologically before Origins, so like, seriously, what was the point beyond just a marketing gimmick? The present day storyline sees the introduction of a new character, Layla Hassan, who works for Abstergo. After she got shafted by Abstergo by not getting the credit she deserved for working on a project, she decides to try a new Animus design while out in the field and relives Bayek's and Aya's memories. These parts of the game reminded me of the Desmond parts of Brotherhood, where you have a location to explore and you can read emails and files that help fill in some of the story. There's actually a lot of stuff to read here for those who are interested. The game also features a museum mode which you can play to get a virtual tour of some locations in the game. This is a cool feature, but this is also the first game in the franchise to not have a database, which kinda sucks. The gameplay is where the biggest changes have been made. Origins is a full-on RPG. The only thing missing is a dialogue system which was added in Odyssey. There's quests and loot and skill trees and experience points. It's not the best or deepest RPG I've ever seen, but an RPG it is nonetheless. But before all that, let's talk about the three pillars of the series: navigation, stealth, and combat. The first thing I noticed was the new control scheme, which threw me for a loop. Having the free run button be anything other than the right trigger after playing so many AC games just felt wrong and unnatural, so I switched to the more traditional AC control scheme really quickly. The parkour system in Origins works a little bit differently than the previous games in the series. If you think you can climb something, you can. In fact, even if you don't think you can climb something, you probably can as well. Origins is a little more gung-ho with the whole climbing system, even allowing you to climb sheer cliff faces with no issue. I imagine this change was made to accommodate the differences between Origins more spread out RPG type world and the more urban and closer building layouts of previous games' locations. Honestly, Origins parkour kind of reminds me of Breath of the Wild's climbing system, except without a stamina meter. Unity introduced the free run down system, which was then carried over into Syndicate, allowing for a quick and easy way to descend from high buildings to ground level while also having some cool animations and transitions. Origins retains the system but tweaks it a little. The style and flash of Unity and Syndicate have been mostly removed in favor of a more utilitarian system to account for the difference in design between Egypt and France and London. When you want to climb down, Bayek will just climb down in the most direct way possible. It definitely takes a while to get used to if you're familiar with the previous version of the system. Most of the time spent in Origins will be either running around on foot or on a mount, of which there are two kinds, camels and horses. Both animals handle pretty much exactly the same, so it's really just a matter of preference. I mostly stuck with the camel because when will I have the chance to ride a virtual camel again? Honestly, the parkour in Origins feels incredibly incidental, more than any other game in the series. Up until this point, the free run part of Assassin's Creed was a defining part of the franchise, something that helped it stand apart from other open world games and gave the series an identity of its own. But in Origins, the parkour system just kind of feels like another part of the game that you can use sometimes. I mean, it still works, and it is really awesome getting to climb to the top of the pyramids and all, but I don't know, it really feels like more of an afterthought here. As for the stealth, the game does pretty well, I think, for the most part. You still have your hidden blade, but it isn't a guaranteed kill if the enemy is a high enough level, or if you haven't upgraded your blade's strength enough. This is a bit of a contentious change, as I personally think that knowing exactly what will kill an enemy in stealth games is pretty vital information for coming up with a good strategy, but I did upgrade my hidden blade throughout the game, and there were only a handful of times where I didn't get an instant kill with an assassination, so I ultimately don't think it was a huge deal. Especially when there are a lot of other tools at your disposal and ways to deal with enemies stealthily. The most obvious change for stealth is the way Eagle Vision works now. Instead of the shittier version of the Arkham games Detective Vision that we've had for so long, now we have an actual eagle named Senu that we can take control of at almost any point during gameplay to get a literal bird's eye view of our surroundings. It functions similarly to what the Far Cry games have done for a while now. I personally found this change to fit very well with the new world design, and Senu's perception, aka how well he can detect and mark targets, can be increased by synchronizing viewpoints. There are returning tools like sleep darts and berserk darts, sort of, along with a few new tools and abilities like taming animals. I didn't unlock these because I mostly focused on the warrior and hunter skill trees, but they sound cool, and by all accounts they are cool. A nice little aspect of the stealth is that whenever an enemy detects you, there is a clear audio cue and a visual indicator that tells you exactly where you've been detected from, and it goes into slow motion for just a second, which can give you a chance to kill the enemy before they alert anyone else. It's essentially the same alert mechanic from Metal Gear Solid 5. The most useful stealth option besides assassination and Senu are the bows, of which there are 4 different types: hunter bows, light bows, warrior bows, and predator bows. Each bow is designed for a different purpose. For example, light bows are quick-fire bows that shoot arrow after arrow in quick succession, and warrior bows shoot multiple arrows at once, kind of like an ancient Egyptian shotgun. I mostly stuck with the hunter and light bow during my playthrough, although the predator bow's ability to control an arrow during flight seems sick as hell. Too bad I either never read that ability node or for some reason just didn't understand what it meant. Oh well. Origins brings back a crafting and hunting system. This system was originally introduced in the series in AC3 but disappeared for a little while after Unity came out. Bayek can hunt animals for their pelts and goods, which you can then either sell or use to craft new upgrades for your hidden blade, quiver, max health, etc. You also need other materials like iron, bronze, or wood, which you can buy from shops if you unlock a certain ability, or you can dismantle your weapons, shields, and bows to get some. Loot is a big part of Origins. As I just mentioned, there are multiple types of bows in the game, and there are also different shields and many types of weapons. There are regular swords, sickle swords, dual swords, heavy blunts, heavy blades, scepters, and spears. I mostly stuck with regular swords and heavy blades as their overpower abilities were my favorite. A nice touch that again brings to mind Ghost of Tsushima, although Origins came out first, is that you can loot from your mount, meaning you don't have to annoyingly dismount every time you come across a piece of gear you want. Origins combat is my favorite in the series so far, which is kind of funny because I said in my Syndicate review that game's combat had become my favorite in the series, but it got beat out in the next game. I hope Odyssey continues this trend. During combat, you have your basic attack, heavy attack, and dodge. There is a lock-on system, but it's not the most reliable one I've ever seen, and it can be a real pain in the ass during fights with multiple enemies. You have an adrenaline gauge which fills up the more damage you deal enemies, and once full you can unleash the aforementioned Overpower ability, which is a powerful attack that deals a lot of damage and is different for each weapon type. Of course, you can use your whole armory with your fire bombs and your bows during combat as well, so when you take into account all the different weapon types and unlockable abilities, you have the deepest combat system ever made for an Assassin's Creed game. Speaking of abilities, you gain XP from completing areas on the map or killing enemies or completing quests, and every time you level up, you gain an ability point you can spend to unlock an ability. Some abilities require more than 1 point to unlock, up to a maximum of 3. There are 3 different branches: Warrior, aka Combat, Seer, aka Stealth, and Hunter, aka Archery. As I mentioned earlier, I decided to focus on the Warrior and Hunter paths, which made me quite the formidable foe in combat encounters, and you really notice a difference when you begin the game and when you end the game. These aren't just stat boosts or buffs. You will have many more options and abilities available to you by the time the credits roll. It's pretty awesome. That being said, there are some oddities with the skill tree, like a few skills that really should be unlocked from the jump, like the ability to essentially sleep and fast forward time. There are some quests in the game that require a specific time of day to advance, so if you don't unlock this ability, you'll just be standing around waiting. Also, some abilities have too high of an asking price for what they actually entail, such as having to pay 3 points for the ability to automatically loot an enemy you kill. It literally just saves you a button press, but you need to level up 3 times to be able to afford it. Like, what? Origins has a feature that I don't recall ever seeing before in a game, which is the option to turn on or off level scaling for enemies, which I was very glad to see so I could turn that shit off immediately. I do not like level scaling in RPGs. One of the best part of RPGs to me is going from a low level character that is weak with no resources and very limited in their abilities to a beast of a character that can take on legendary challenges and hordes of enemies single-handedly. That feeling of progression and growth is central to an RPG experience for me, and having enemies that scale with you as you level up completely kneecaps that entire aspect of the genre in my opinion. So yeah, I'm glad Origins lets you turn it off. The game's quests are separated into 2 categories, main and side quests. There are events as well, but these aren't really quests. They're more like optional boss fights that were added to the game after launch, where you get to do battle with an Egyptian god for some rare loot. These are pretty cool additions to the game, but I'm not a fan of grinding, so I don't think I'll return to these. Main quests are of course the main story of the game that take place all across Egypt. Egypt itself is spread into a bunch of different areas, all with their own recommended level. The main story is actually a pretty crafted experience, which purposefully carves a path through each area of Egypt with a gradual ramping up of levels. I did a fair amount of side quests during my playthrough and never found that I was too far from the recommended level for the next main mission, at least for the base game. If you do want to just mainline the story, you'll probably be underleveled on more than one occasion. Side quests in Origins are fine. They're not bad, but they do get repetitive. You can only go and rescue someone from a Greek or bandit camp so many times before it starts to lose its luster. Overall though, I found most of the side quests to be enjoyable enough for me to want to continue doing them for the majority of my playthrough. Origins does have microtransactions, and Ubisoft actually pulled a little sneaky here by having certain parts of the game be locked behind Helix credits, the real money currency in the game. There are maps that reveal the locations of certain types of side content. These kinds of maps have been in previous AC games like chest maps, except Ubisoft does not let you get these in-game. You need to pay real money for them. Fuck off, Ubisoft. Origins has 2 main single-player DLCs, the Hidden Ones and the Curse of the Pharaohs. These DLCs, however, have a recommended level that was quite higher than the level for the last story mission in the game, so there is a boost included that you can use if you don't want to grind it out. I ended up using the boost because after I finished the game I thought, do I really want to grind for another 10 hours for this? And the answer was no. The game actually makes a separate save file though for your boosted character, so you can go back to an unboosted save if you want to. The Hidden Ones is a pretty simple tale about Bayek going to a new location and killing some more Templar types, and ends with the finalization of the Assassin's Creed. The ending with Ezio's family plane was a pretty cool touch. Overall, I enjoyed the Hidden Ones quite a bit because it was a simple and to-the-point DLC with some of the most challenging and interesting enemy camps to play through. These were actually my favorite gameplay scenarios of the entire game. The Curse of the Pharaohs, on the other hand, is a little less simple. This DLC really reminded me of the Tyranny of King Washington DLC for Assassin's Creed 3 because it is full of crazy-ass stuff that comes into existence as a result of a piece of Eden. You get to go to another new location which has a few surprises, like exploring regions from Egyptian mythology and new enemy types also from Egyptian mythology. Personally, while the Curse of the Pharaohs is the more creative and substantial DLC in terms of content and length, I also feel like it's kind of stretched out a bit, and I ultimately preferred the more focused approach that the Hidden Ones had. In terms of pricing, I managed to get the Origins Season Pass on sale for $20, which was a very good deal in my opinion. The Season Pass comes with both DLCs and a couple skins, as well as some Helix credits, the microtransaction currency in the game. But when not on sale, the Season Pass is $50. That is too much. I think the ideal price for this content would probably be $25, maybe $30 maximum. But $50? That's $10 less than the full price of the game at launch. Get the fuck out of here, Ubisoft. Do I recommend getting the DLC? Well, if you liked Origins, then the DLC is more of the game and you'll probably like it as well. But I cannot recommend that you buy the DLC at full price. It's just too much, so I would wait for a sale if I were you. Origins is now one of my favorite games in the series. Its world is utterly transfixing in its beauty and splendor, and instilled a sense of wonder and awe that brings to mind games like Skyrim, Red Dead Redemption 2, and Ghost of Tsushima. The gameplay is also excellent, with the best combat the series has ever had, and some new RPG systems that, while not the top of their class, do a great job of injecting a feeling of freshness to the experience, for the most part. Origins does fall prey to the two most common pitfalls of the franchise as a whole: a lackluster story and a sense of repetition and bloat after a while. Also, even though the parkour system is still intact, it feels less important to the game than it ever has before, and I don't know how I feel about that. A thought that kept creeping into my mind as I was playing through Origins was, does this game still feel like an Assassin's Creed game? Or to put it another way, how much can a franchise change before it stops feeling like the franchise? And this is not a new idea for the series either. A lot of people really love Black Flag and think it's a great game, but don't necessarily think it's a great Assassin's Creed game. And personally, I actually feel like Origins has more in common with a traditional AC game than Black Flag does. Still, all of these RPG systems have certainly changed the series, and I can definitely understand why a longtime fan might be put off by them. But at the end of the day, I thoroughly enjoyed my time with Origins overall and think it's one of the best games in the series. I'm going to give Assassin's Creed Origins an 8.5 out of 10. I'm sorry it took so long for this review to come out, but it's a long game, and I only have so much free time outside of work. Plus, E3 happened while I was working on this video, and I had to get a tooth removed as well, so I needed a couple days to recover from that. Fun times. The next review will be for Resident Evil 8, so stay tuned for that one. If you liked this video, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, and commenting your thoughts on the game. Thanks for watching.